This is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. At least that's our name for now. This weekend, we are offering 7 conversations from episodes 29 and 30, our real-time coverage of EASL Congress 2023. Plus, on Tuesday, we will be reposting episode 28 with Mike Betel from the Fatty Liver Alliance and I, interviewing Dr. Tetiana Deshko, Director of Programs at the Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine. These episodes speak for themselves, so I'm going to keep the introduction short and sweet, leaving more time for the conversations themselves. This conversation includes Jörn Schattenberg, Ian Rowe, Mike Betel from the Fatty Liver Alliance, and me sharing our initial impressions of the first 3 days of the EASL Congress 2023. The conversation takes place at 6:15 in the morning local time. Listen to hear which of us are most tired and, conversely, who's the most energized. The content's simple. I ask each participant to share a word or short phrase that captured their impressions of the conference so far. This episode consists of our sharing our words and elaborating on the impressions behind them. We then go on to discuss the impact of the opening general session presentation on Thursday, with Stephen Harrison presenting the exciting MAESTRO-NASH Phase 3 results. For a variety of reasons, the entire community looked forward to this meeting with an intensity and excitement I, at least, had not seen at previous events. These 7 conversations suggest that the actual event met or exceeded these high expectations. So did the fact that the Tsunami podcast will spend the next month with 5 episodes reviewing highlights from meetings in detail. A lot happened, a lot's worth thinking about, a lot worth listening to. So sit back, listen, enjoy, learn, and when you're done, join the discussion on our LinkedIn or Facebook discussion groups. Just really simply, one of the things I asked you gents to do was to open with general impressions. And what I'd like to ask you each to do is give me a word or a short phrase with no elaboration that describes your impression of this conference so far. And then we'll go back and elaborate on how you got there. Then we'll talk about what I think is the most important paper of the conference, Stephen Harrison's presentation of the MAESTRO-NASH data on Thursday morning at the general session. And then we'll talk about things that we each found interesting and important. So one word or one phrase that captures your general feeling about this meeting. Bold one, go first.
Jörn Schattenberg.
I haven't said so much at this point, and it might be that I'm a little tired, but I'll start with excitement. I came in feeling a little nervous about, how we're going to do this. There's the nomenclature debate today, or discussion, and of course, big data being presented. I myself had some presentations, so I think I went in with excitement.
Mike, go ahead. Take a second.
Mike Betel.
No, we're not describing it now, right? We're waiting until after.
No, but given that Jörn cheated, if you want to describe it, take a minute and do that.
I can't say things in one word.
There goes the plan.
Well, okay, so no, Mike, why don't you be the good boy and stick with the plan, and we'll come back to why you said exhilarating in a minute.
Ian Rowe.
Hot.
Yeah. Particularly for those of us from the U.S. who are in unair-conditioned hotels, really hot. I think mine is going to be energizing, which is a little different than exhilarating, and I'll come back to why in a minute. But so, Mike, since you were bold enough to go second, why don't you talk about why exhilarating?
Well, for me, I guess I draw this meeting sort of proves I am an extrovert, I guess, because I drew a lot of energy from the people that we talked to and then we met with. I just loved every second of it. I couldn't stop. I think I could have said adrenaline rush, but that wasn't one word. But it was really fun. Enjoyed it a lot. I'm still enjoying it. We still got another half day here.
But now, for those of you who are not on LinkedIn, I've lost count, but Mike must have posted at least 25 videos on LinkedIn to the first 3 days of this meeting. Everywhere he goes, he pulls out his phone, he posts a video, he does another one. The most infamous being the one where my hair was blowing sideways across my head, and I literally looked at the camera and said, oh my God, look at my hair. But he's been doing that all through, and it's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
I love that. Nora's laughing. I don't know if it's too much or just enough, but I figure if people don't want to see it, they just scroll up.
Yeah, that's been great. So Ian, you chose hot, which I'm assuming was in one part about the weather, but was it only about the weather?
No, I think it describes a bit of the, of the way the data at the meeting feel, hot off the press, and in some cases really quite hot in terms of how interesting and exciting they are. And I guess we'll dig into some of those presentations as we go through. But it really has been temperature hot too. As I came in my suit on Thursday to chair a session, I wondered whether I really should have been wearing my swimming shorts and being on holiday rather than in a suit working. But I think maybe I was more accustomed to the rain that we had last night.
And actually, the rain was really welcome. In fact, I usually don't like getting caught out in the rain without an umbrella, but last night it was a delight to do that, or to have that happen. Here's why I said energizing. First of all, I think everything everyone said is correct. A tremendous amount of really exciting presentations and a lot of ferment. And I go back to NASH-TAG 2019, the first time I was in this space, when people spent 2 days trying to figure out how do you get a one-level regression of fibrosis in a clinical trial. And we are so far beyond that now in so many different directions, in breadth, in depth, in the questions we're asking. But also, you can start to see where big debates are boiling up. And papers I chose to talk about this morning are going to be around the issue of AI and the 8 different definitions, figurative, but the 3 or 4 very different ways that people are describing AI right now, and how I think that will potentially come into conflict. And you can see a competitive dynamic and an intellectual dynamic setting up. And it's not just about that. It's also about drug choices and all kinds of things where people are coming forth with enough data now that you can really see this in different ways. And folks did that. I think it's fantastic. I love a good debate. So with that, we'll go back to Baldwin. Let's spend a little bit of time on resmetirom. Okay. Ian, in what I think was one of the interesting cheats of this year, decided that when we did the preview, he went first and he said, well, I'll just say resmetirom is really exciting, which got him out of having to take a stand on anything. But I'll go back to you now. Seeing it presented and watching how the room and the meeting reacted, how did that strike you?
It was really good to see the data in a bit more depth than we'd seen in the press release, and it confirms the way that I think about it, which is that the efficacy is good. It's met both of the registrational endpoints, I think, and the safety profile is confirmed as being good enough. It's not a massive data set. It's bigger than previous data sets because they've had parallel studies where they've accumulated additional safety data and supportive efficacy data. I think it'll probably be enough to cross the threshold with the regulators for conditional licensing. I was sort of struck that I guess it didn't have the same excitement and buzz around it in the room as it did in the days of hepatitis C. And maybe that's just a bar that's too high, and that we should stop comparing to what happened in 2010 and 11 and 12 for how we should feel and how we should respond to high quality and really quite compelling data. I guess that novelty was still missing, and the thing that I think supports that a little bit is that I was kind of expecting that we would see the manuscripts at the same time. Big splash, New England Journal presentation same day, and we haven't seen that. So I guess I was left wanting just a little bit more.
That's interesting. I don't know about you folks, but when I look for, in terms of the efficacy profile and everything else, when I think in the context of Hep C, I go back to interferon and ribavirin, maybe a little better than that. But this certainly isn't Harvoni and Sovaldi in terms of efficacy. And the disease is more complex and the drug isn't as efficacious or as simple a choice.
Roger, so, and Ian, I was there for Intron A for hepatitis, and it was like, Gary Davis, 50% response, 50% relapse, but there was no RNA. They were using ALTs as a marker. So, and it got approved. So, to me, these are like twice that. Sure, you guys are getting tired of the new data, but remember, you're right to bring back what it was like for decades. So.
Okay, Jörn, thoughts about resmetirom?
I'm trying to think. We want a lot at this time. It's a chronic disease we're not going to get cure for. So I felt it was a pretty compelling data set. I agree that we've kind of seen the data through the press release, which is always a spoiler. But then with the presentation, it was a little bit more in depth. It was, reflecting. It was 990 patients, roughly. I think a little less. 60% were F3 advanced fibrosis. So these are pre-cirrhotic patients. And if you crank up their thyroid hormone receptors activation in the liver, they start to lose fibrosis and steatohepatitis resolution. So it met both endpoints. I thought that was also interesting. Again, the delta over placebo, 20% for the NASH resolution, 12, I think, for the fibrosis regression. Both doses worked. I thought that was interesting. So now we have a drug with 2 efficacious doses. What are we going to do? We're going to use 80 or 100? And they showed, and I guess I'm part of the co-authors, is the doses didn't so matter. It didn't differ so much in terms of different subgroups that they looked at. So it kind of went the same direction in all subcategories that were explored. The safety profile was good. We've seen a drug now being not approved for the safety profile, so that one was ticked the box, and it's an oral. So it's quite an advancement for us.
I couldn't agree more. And when I mentioned interferon and ribavirin, actually where I was going to was, if you think about what Hep C was before that was considered quite an advance at the time, primitive compared to what we do now. And I'd like to think that if we go forward 12 years in steatotic liver disease, or whatever we're going to call this, we will look back and say that this was a good start, but primitive compared to where we are 12 years from now. For that reason, one of the undertones was that, unfortunately, towards the latter part of the OCA FDA AdCom, some of the people on the panel started questioning the efficacy endpoint. And I believe that until the day this drug gets approved, many people will be at least a little bit fearful that they might do that again. I'm not particularly fearful. First of all, OCA only hit one endpoint, not both on efficacy. And second, the safety issues were far worse. And third, DILI is a real issue, particularly if you have a drug that's going to go out to primary care. Because I had this conversation, actually, when we talked about it on the podcast, in the episode, we talked about how Jörn and Manal Abdulmalik, Manal actually being the person who testified to this during the comments hour, could probably handle anything that they saw with an OCA patient, but a primary care doc probably couldn't. And one of the things I heard this week, it might have been from one of you two guys, Ian Rowe, it might have been from somebody else, is that the advisors who were working with Intercept suggested that they take a far less ambitious pose to the FDA, talk a lot more about safety, talk a lot more about DILI, talk a lot more about, REMS strategies, and that the commercial people chose not to do that because they wanted broad labeling. If that's true, and I don't know that it is, I've only heard it, but that would have meant they overplayed their hand. I believe that Madrigal will be a lot smarter about this. I was talking with Madrigal people at this meeting who said that Becky Taub's level of caution around what they will and won't say about the drug befits an appreciation that first it's got to get approved, and that overstatement before approval doesn't help you at FDA. So I believe they will play it really well from here on out, and I believe their data is good enough. Until it's over the line, I think people are just going to have some concerns.
Roger, I was going to say the exact same thing, that it's a cautious optimism, I think. The data looks good, but I think people are afraid exactly what you just said. That it might happen again. And so from that patient perspective too, so I also spoke at the FDA and the ICER, and so there were issues to talk about there. So I think hopefully this will be better.
I hope so. Actually, I feel really good for Stephen Harrison. When his last line, which is the thing I think he's been dying to say for as long as I've known him, was that we now have a drug that appears to make a positive contribution. It was premature for a victory lap, but it certainly felt like a victory statement.
I was waiting for him to say, and this is going to make a big fat dent on fatty liver disease. I would have
I think that's the level of optimism he didn't want to go to. And if he did, I think Becky would have probably come on the stage and stepped on his foot. Not because it's not right, Jörn. I think it is, but I think we'd be a little careful for a minute. No, first of all, I think you're right. I think it'll be a big fat dent. I just don't think you claim it until after it gets approved. But I think also, by the way, that set the tone for the entire meeting. First talk of general session, and just left everybody feeling a lot better. At least that was my sense.
No, I agree. I think it started off well.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. Next week begins our 5-episode review of key EASL Congress findings. Also, keep an eye and ear out on LinkedIn and Facebook for invitations to share your thoughts on our upcoming brand change, given that, as people keep writing, and I quote, "NASH is dead. Long live NASH and NASL." End of quote. So until then, stay safe. Surf on. If you're in the States, enjoy the July 4th weekend, and we'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.